The room went quiet after my wife looked straight at me and said, "Can you step out?" This is a family photo. I wish I could tell you I laughed it off. I didn't. I stood there beside a fake ficus tree at Harbor Lights Grill in Burnside, Kentucky, holding the little gift bag I'd carried in from the truck. Linda's brother Michael had hired a local photographer for her 62nd birthday, and everyone had gathered near the windows with Lake Cumberland shining behind them. Linda was in the middle wearing a blue dress I'd bought her at Dillard's. Her daughter Paige stood on one side. Tom, Linda's ex-husband, stood on the other. And I was apparently in the way. Linda gave me a small, impatient wave. "Just for this one, Dan. Family only." Nobody said anything. Not Michael, not Paige, not Linda's mother who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my table for 11 years. Even Tom looked embarrassed, but not embarrassed enough to move. So I stepped out. The photographer lifted his camera and said, "Everybody squeeze in." They did. I looked at Linda through the edge of the crowd. She was smiling before I had even cleared the frame. That was the part that got me. I had been married to her for 12 years. I had driven her to every appointment during her breast cancer scare. I had replaced the roof on her house with my own retirement money. I had sat in hospital waiting rooms, fixed broken garbage disposals, picked Paige up when her car died outside Bowling Green, and taught Linda's granddaughter how to bait a hook. But when someone said family, I was the man they asked to move. I set the gift bag on an empty chair and walked toward the front door. Michael called after me, "Dan, you leaving already?" I turned around. For half a second, I thought about saying everything that was pushing against my ribs. Instead, I said, "Looks like you've got the people you need." Outside, the July heat hit me hard. It was 4:18 in the afternoon, and the parking lot smelled like hot asphalt and fried catfish from the kitchen vent. I climbed into my silver Ford F-150, shut the door, and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine. Part of me wanted Linda to come running out. I kept watching the restaurant entrance, expecting that blue dress to appear. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. A family with 2 little boys walked past my truck, arguing over who got the last hush puppy. The father laughed and opened the back door for them. Still no Linda. At 4:31, I started the truck. My phone buzzed before I pulled onto Highway 27. I thought it might be her. It wasn't. Paige had posted the picture on Facebook. There they were, shoulder to shoulder, smiling beneath the caption, "Family is everything." I looked at the empty space where I had been standing. Then I put the truck in drive and headed north. I didn't go home. Not that night. Instead, I checked into the Hampton Inn just off Interstate 75 in Corbin. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and only about an hour and a half from Burnside. The woman at the front desk smiled as she handed me my key card. "Just one night?" she asked. I hesitated. "I honestly don't know." She gave me a kind look, the sort that comes from years of dealing with tired travelers. "Well, breakfast starts at 6. That was the nicest thing anyone had said to me all afternoon. The room smelled faintly of fresh laundry and coffee. I set my overnight bag on the bed and sat in the desk chair without turning on the television. For the first time in years, there wasn't anyone asking where I was or when I'd be home. My phone buzzed constantly. Facebook notifications, birthday photos, people tagging Linda, people commenting, "Beautiful family. You all look wonderful together. Love seeing everyone reunited." Reunited. That word stayed with me. I opened the picture again. Tom had one hand resting lightly behind Linda's back. Paige stood between them smiling. Michael had his arm around his mother. Everyone looked comfortable, natural, like they'd been standing in that exact arrangement for years. Because maybe they had. I zoomed in, hoping I'd notice something that made it hurt less. Instead, I noticed something strange. No one looked toward the place where I'd been standing. It was as if nobody had expected me to be there in the first place. I tossed the phone onto the bed. Around 8 o'clock, I walked across the parking lot to Cracker Barrel. I'd eaten there dozens of times over the years after long UPS routes. The waitress, a woman about my age named Sharon, according to her name tag, poured my coffee. "You waiting on somebody?" I smiled without thinking. "Not anymore." She nodded once. No questions. Sometimes strangers know exactly when to leave you alone. Back in my room, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I opened the Photos app on my phone. 12 years. Thousands of pictures. There was Linda opening Christmas presents, Linda fishing on Dale Hollow Lake, Linda holding our granddaughter Emma after her kindergarten graduation, Linda laughing in our backyard while I grilled burgers. Then something caught my attention. In almost every big family picture, I wasn't in it. I had taken it. Christmas 2017, me behind the camera. Easter 2019, me taking the picture. 4th of July, Thanksgiving, graduations, birthdays, Even our trip to Gatlinburg, there were dozens of photos of everyone else. Only a handful with me. I'd always volunteered. Here, I'll take it. Let me get everybody. I don't mind. I had told myself someone had to hold the camera. Now I wasn't so sure. Around 11, I received a text. Linda, where did you go? I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then another arrived. Linda, everyone's asking where you are. That one almost made me laugh. Nobody had asked when I walked out. Another message. Linda, can we please talk? I typed 3 different replies. Deleted all of them. Finally, I locked my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. At 12:14 a.m., someone knocked on my hotel door. For one startled second, I wondered if Linda had somehow found me. Instead, it was Frank Collins, my next-door neighbor, retired electrician, Weedover, 71 years old. He held 2 paper cups from the lobby coffee station. I figured this was where you'd end up, he said. I blinked. How? He shrugged. Your truck wasn't at the house. This is the closest decent hotel off the interstate. I stepped aside. Frank handed me one of the coffees. He looked around the room before settling into the desk chair. Then he asked the question I'd been avoiding all evening. Dan, when did they stop treating you like your wife's husband and start treating you like a guest? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out because I couldn't remember. And somehow, that frightened me even more than the birthday picture. Frank stayed until nearly 1 in the morning. Neither of us talked much. We'd known each other for almost 8 years, ever since Linda and I moved into our little ranch house outside Somerset. Frank wasn't the kind of man who believed every silence needed filling. He'd lost his wife to Alzheimer's 5 years earlier. He understood that some hurts had to settle before words could reach them. Before leaving, he stood by the door. You don't have to make any decisions tonight, I nodded. But don't make excuses for people who wouldn't make them for you. Then he left. I didn't sleep more than 2 hours. At 6:30, I walked downstairs for breakfast. The lobby smelled of waffles and burnt bacon. A couple wearing University of Kentucky shirts argued playfully over who had forgotten the syrup. An older woman was reading the Lexington Herald-Leader while sipping orange juice. Life kept moving. Mine felt like it had slammed into a wall. Back upstairs, I made another mistake. I opened Facebook again. Linda had uploaded more pictures overnight. Different angles, different groups. One photo showed the grandchildren around the cake. Another showed Linda hugging her mother. Then I found one that made my stomach tighten. Tom was helping Linda cut the birthday cake. The caption read, "Couldn't have celebrated without the people who've always been there." I stared at those words. Always been there. I whispered them out loud. What exactly was I then? I clicked through older albums. Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter brunch, family reunions. The farther back I looked, the more I noticed little things I'd ignored for years. Tom sitting beside Linda at Emma's softball games. Tom standing next to her at high school graduation. Tom helping carry coolers during 4th of July cookouts. I remembered telling myself they were simply co-parenting. Their daughter was grown now. She was 34. There wasn't any parenting left to do. Yet somehow Tom never stopped being invited. And I never stopped pretending it didn't bother me. Then I noticed something else. Several older photos had obviously been cropped. In one picture from Thanksgiving 3 years earlier, I remembered standing beside Linda. The version online showed only her. Another Christmas photo had cut off my shoulder. One anniversary dinner picture had disappeared altogether. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it hurt. Around 10 that morning, I drove back towards Somerset. I wasn't ready to see Linda, but I needed to think somewhere that didn't smell like hotel coffee. I stopped at General Burnside Island State Park. Linda and I used to picnic there every spring. I sat on a bench overlooking the water. A fisherman eased his aluminum boat away from the dock while 2 little girls tossed bread to ducks. My phone rang. It was my older sister, Carol. She lived outside Louisville and somehow always seemed to know when something was wrong. You sound tired, she said after I answered. I guess I am. Frank must have called her. He was about the only person who had her number. We talked about ordinary things at first. The weather, her tomatoes, my blood pressure. Then she quietly asked, "Did something happen yesterday?" I looked across the lake. They asked me to step out of the family picture. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she sighed. "Dan, I've been afraid this day would come." Those words made me sit up straighter. "What do you mean?" Another long pause. "I didn't know whether I should tell you." "Tell me what?" "I've heard things over the years." "What things?" Carol's voice softened. "Linda's family never really believed your marriage would last." I felt every muscle in my shoulders tighten. They thought she'd eventually find her way back to Tom. I couldn't speak. Carol continued carefully. "Nobody ever said they hated you. That almost would have been easier. They just treated you like someone filling in until the story went back to how they thought it was supposed to end. I stared across the lake. Suddenly, a dozen little moments I'd brushed aside over the years came rushing back. The extra chair saved for Tom. The holiday invitations that always included his name. The jokes about old times that I never understood. I hadn't imagined any of it. I had simply chosen not to see it. Carol's voice broke the silence. I'm sorry, Danny. So am I. After we hung up, I remained on that bench for nearly an hour. The breeze rolled across Lake Cumberland, gentle enough to ripple the water. For the first time since the birthday party, I stopped asking whether I'd overreacted. Instead, I began asking a different question. How long had I been living inside a marriage where everyone else already knew I didn't belong? I didn't go back to the house. Not after my conversation with Carol. Instead, I drove aimlessly through Pulaski County, passing places that had once felt familiar. The marathon station where Linda always bought sunflower seeds for road trips. The little diner in Nancy where we'd stop after church on Sundays. The Lowe's where we'd spent 3 weekends picking out flooring after a pipe burst in our hallway. Every mile carried another memory. By noon, I pulled into a small park overlooking the Cumberland River. I bought a sandwich from a nearby Subway, but after 2 bites, I folded it back into the wrapper. My appetite had disappeared somewhere between the birthday cake and Carol's phone call. I was sitting on a picnic table when my phone rang. Michael, Linda's younger brother. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, Mike. He sounded exhausted. Dan, where are you? I don't know. He gave a tired laugh. I mean physically. Near the river. There was a long silence. You scared everybody. I looked across the water. Did I? Another pause. You really just left. I did. You could have talked to Linda. I've been talking for 12 years. He didn't have an answer for that. Finally, he cleared his throat. She cried herself to sleep. I didn't say anything. She hasn't stopped crying since you left. I closed my eyes. A younger version of me would have turned the truck around right then. The man I had become wasn't so sure. Michael continued. She keeps saying she didn't mean anything by it. I rubbed my forehead. Mike, can I ask you one question? Sure. If I'd stayed in that picture, I let the sentence hang for a second. Who would have stepped out? Silence. Not the kind where someone is thinking. The kind where someone already knows the answer. I waited. 20 seconds. 30. Finally, Michael exhaled. I don't know. No. I spoke quietly. You do know. He swallowed. But you can't say it. His voice became almost a whisper. Dan, would Tom have moved? Nothing. Would Paige? Still nothing. Would Linda? The silence answered for him. I thanked him anyway. For what? For being honest enough not to lie. Before he could respond, I ended the call. I sat there for several minutes staring at my reflection in the river. The answer hurt because it had arrived without words. Nobody would have stepped aside. The only person expected to move had been me. Around 3 that afternoon, I finally drove home. The mailbox was overflowing with advertisements and grocery flyers. The house looked exactly the same as I'd left it 24 hours earlier. Linda's SUV was gone. Inside, the living room was spotless. Her birthday flowers sat on the dining room table. The balloons Michael's grandchildren had brought were already beginning to sag. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined everything. Then I saw the framed family photos lining the hallway. Linda, Paige, Emma, holiday after holiday, vacation after vacation. I stood there counting. 1, 2, 3, 7, 11. There were 16 framed photographs. I appeared in exactly 3 of them. One was our wedding. Another had been taken by a church photographer. The third was a blurry picture Frank had snapped during a neighborhood barbecue. I walked upstairs and opened the closet. Most of my clothes were still hanging where I'd left them. I packed a few shirts, jeans, my shaving kit, and the old leather Bible my father had given me when I turned 21. As I zipped the suitcase closed, I heard the garage door opening. Linda was home. Her footsteps hurried across the kitchen. Then she saw the suitcase. Dan, her voice cracked. Oh, thank God. She rushed toward me, reaching for my hands. I stepped back. Not angrily, just enough that she noticed. Tears filled her eyes. I've been calling you everywhere. I know. I'm so sorry. I believe she meant it. That was the hardest part. Because being sorry wasn't the same as understanding. She looked at the suitcase. Please don't leave. I glanced around the bedroom we'd shared for 12 years. I think, I said quietly, I should have left a long time ago. She began crying again. This time I didn't know how to comfort her, because I was still trying to figure out why no one had comforted me. Linda stood in the bedroom doorway, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. I know how it looked, she said. I made a terrible mistake. I rested my suitcase on the floor. You did? It was just one picture. I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. She shook her head. Dan, please don't throw away 12 years over one stupid moment. I almost answered. Then I stopped myself, because she still believed the photograph had caused this. She didn't understand that the picture had only revealed something that had been there for years. I need some time, I said. How much? I honestly don't know. She reached for my hand again. This time I let her hold it for a second before gently pulling away. I love you. I know. And I love you. That was true. Love had never been our biggest problem. Respect was. I carried my suitcase downstairs. Linda followed me all the way to the front door. Will you answer if I call? I'll think about it. That wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only honest one I had. I stayed with Frank that night. He had a spare bedroom that still smelled faintly of cedar from the old chest of drawers his wife had refinished years before. He didn't ask many questions. He simply handed me a clean towel and said, "Bathrooms down the hall." The next morning after breakfast, I drove back to the house while Linda was at work. I wasn't ready to talk again. I only wanted the rest of my clothes and a few personal things. The house was silent. Sunlight came through the kitchen window, catching the dust floating above the table. I walked upstairs and opened the closet. Half my life fit into 2 suitcases. Funny how quickly 12 years could be folded into luggage. As I reached for a box on the top shelf, something slid off and landed on the carpet. A large manila envelope. I frowned. I didn't recognize it. Across the front in black marker were the words, "Estate planning." I almost put it back. Then I noticed Linda's handwriting beneath it. Updated 18 months ago. 18 months. She'd never mentioned updating anything. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope. Inside were copies of legal documents, property records, insurance information, beneficiary forms. Then I found the will. I wasn't trying to snoop anymore. Now I was trying to understand. My eyes moved slowly across the pages. The house would pass to Paige. Linda's investment account, also to Paige. Family jewelry, to Emma. Savings, split between Paige and Emma. Then I reached the paragraph about me. I read it twice because I thought I'd misunderstood. If Linda died first, I would receive her 2017 Honda CR-V and $25,000. That was all. Everything else returned to her biological family. The woman I'd shared a home with for 12 years had rewritten her will a year and a half ago, without saying a word to me. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly, I was confused. If she'd wanted to protect her daughter, I understood that. Any good mother would. But why keep it secret? Why smile through anniversaries and vacations while quietly making sure I would always remain on the outside? I placed the papers back inside the envelope exactly as I'd found them. Then I noticed another folded document tucked into the back. It wasn't legal paperwork. It was a handwritten note. Linda's handwriting. The first line made my chest tighten. I hope Daniel never has to see these papers. He wouldn't understand. I stopped reading. I couldn't. Not because I was afraid. Because for the first time, I understood far more than she ever imagined. The birthday photograph. The family gatherings. The empty place where I always seemed to stand. None of it had happened by accident. Whether she realized it or not, Linda had built 2 families, and I had spent 12 years believing I belonged to both. I quietly closed the envelope, placed it back on the shelf exactly where I'd found it, and carried my suitcases downstairs. As I locked the front door behind me, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something much heavier, the kind of sadness that comes when the truth finally catches up with hope. The first thing I did wasn't call a lawyer. It wasn't empty the bank account. It wasn't change the locks. Truth is, I spent 3 days doing almost nothing. Frank would leave around 8 every morning to meet a group of retired guys at McDonald's on South Highway 27. They drink coffee for 2 hours, complain about politics, compare fishing stories, and head home before lunch. On the 4th morning, he looked at me over his coffee mug. "You planning to hide forever?" "No." "Good." He buttered a biscuit. "Then stop waiting for somebody else to decide what's next." That stayed with me. After breakfast, I drove to Somerset and parked outside Citizens National Bank. Linda and I had shared the same checking account since our 2nd year of marriage. Every paycheck from my UPS retirement, every tax refund, every utility bill had flowed through that account. I sat in the truck for nearly 15 minutes. My hand was on the door handle. I couldn't make myself move. Leaving a marriage isn't one decision. It's 100 small ones, and every one of them hurts. Finally, I walked inside. The young banker smiled. "How can I help you today, Mr. Harper?" "I'd like to open an individual checking account." She nodded and led me into a small office. It took less than half an hour, 30 minutes to separate what had been joined for 12 years. As I signed the paperwork, I felt guilty. Not because I was doing anything wrong, because part of me still hoped Linda would somehow fix this. The next stop was my attorney. I'd used the same lawyer for years, a quiet man named Robert Gaines, whose office overlooked Fountain Square. Robert had handled my retirement paperwork and helped Frank write his will after his wife passed away. He looked up as I walked in. "Dan," he shook my hand. "You don't usually make appointments." "I know." He studied my face for a second. "This isn't about taxes, is it?" "No." An hour later, I'd told him everything. The birthday party, the photograph, the will, the years of feeling like a visitor in my own marriage. Robert leaned back in his chair. "Do you want a divorce?" The question hung in the room. Did I thought about Linda laughing over Sunday morning pancakes. I thought about dancing with her at Paige's wedding. I remembered the nights we watched old westerns together while sharing a bowl of popcorn. Those memories were real. So was the hurt. "I don't know," I admitted. Robert nodded. "You don't have to file today." "I don't." "No." He slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. "But you should protect yourself." He gave me a list. "Open your own accounts. Update beneficiaries. Inventory personal property. Make copies of important documents." Nothing dramatic. Nothing dishonest. Just practical. For the first time all week, I felt like I could breathe. Over the next several days, I quietly worked through the list. I redirected my UPS pension into my new account. I updated the beneficiary on my life insurance policy, naming my niece Sarah, who had helped care for my late brother during his final months. I rented a small post office box in Somerset. I even met with a financial advisor about my retirement investments. Each step felt strangely ordinary. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was slamming doors. Life simply shifted. Linda called every day, sometimes twice. I listened to every voicemail. "Please come home. We can fix this. I miss you." One evening, she left a message that nearly broke me. "I made your favorite chicken and dumplings." I could almost smell them. For a few minutes, I considered driving back. Then I remembered standing outside that birthday picture. Remembered everyone smiling after I'd stepped away. I deleted the voicemail. The final item on Robert's list surprised even me. He'd suggested I think about where I actually wanted to live. Not where Linda wanted to retire. Not where Paige lived. Where I wanted to wake up every morning. A week later, I found myself driving south into eastern Tennessee. Outside a little town near Clinton, I saw a modest one-bedroom cabin sitting on 2 wooded acres. Nothing fancy. A front porch, an old oak tree, a creek running behind the property. The realtor unlocked the door. "What do you think?" I smiled for the first time in days. It felt peaceful. I wasn't buying a cabin to punish Linda. I was buying something I'd forgotten I was allowed to have. A future that belonged to me. And that realization felt more powerful than revenge ever could. 3 weeks passed before I saw Linda again. Long enough for the phone calls to slow down. Long enough for the neighbors to stop wondering why my truck wasn't parked in the driveway. Long enough for me to realize I slept better in Frank's spare bedroom than I had in my own house for months. The cabin in Tennessee was under contract. Robert had prepared the divorce papers. I still hadn't signed them. Every morning I'd unfold the packet, read the first page, then slide it back into the envelope. 12 years deserved more than a rushed decision. Then Michael called. "Linda's having a family barbecue this Saturday." I laughed softly. "I don't think I'm on the guest list anymore." "Actually," he hesitated. "She told everybody you're coming." I frowned. She thinks you're ready to work things out?" I looked across Frank's backyard where he'd been trimming his tomato plants. "Did you tell her that?" "No." "Then why would she think it?" Michael sighed. "Because she wants to." After we hung up, I called Robert. "I think it's time." He didn't ask what I meant. "I'll have everything ready by Friday." Saturday arrived warm and humid. The weather report said 92 degrees with a chance of afternoon thunderstorms. Kentucky's summers had a way of making the air feel heavy enough to wear. I put on a light blue button-down shirt, khaki pants, and the brown loafers Linda had bought me for our anniversary 2 years earlier. For a second, I considered changing shoes. Then I decided not to. They were comfortable. Not every memory needed to be thrown away. Robert met me at his office before noon. He handed me a neat manila folder. Inside were the divorce papers. "I hope you never need these," he said. "So do I. But if today goes the way you think it will?" "I know." I thanked him and drove toward the house. Cars already lined both sides of the street. Children were chasing each other with water balloons. Someone had country music playing through outdoor speakers. The smell of smoked ribs drifted across the yard. From a distance, it looked like every other summer family gathering we'd ever hosted. Linda spotted my truck before I even got out. Her face lit up. She hurried across the lawn. I knew you'd come. Before I could answer, she wrapped both arms around me. For a moment, I almost hugged her back. Old habits don't disappear overnight. She stepped back, smiling through nervous tears. I told everybody we'd figure this out. I glanced toward the patio. Every member of her family was watching us. Paige, Emma, Michael, Linda's mother, even Tom. He stood near the grill holding a paper plate. When our eyes met, he gave me an awkward nod. I nodded back. This wasn't really about him. Linda slipped her hand into mine. Come on. She led me toward the backyard. People began clapping. Someone actually cheered. Linda laughed. See? I told you he'd come home. The words hit me harder than she realized. Home. I looked around the yard. The picnic tables. The flower beds we'd planted together. The maple tree I'd trimmed every fall. For years I'd believed this place was built on love. Now I understood something different. A house can be full of memories and still stop feeling like home. Linda turned to everyone. I just want to thank all of you for supporting us. More applause. She squeezed my hand. I knew we'd get through this. I slowly slipped my hand free. The backyard became quiet. I opened the manila folder. Linda smiled uncertainly. What is that? I looked at her with more sadness than anger. I came because I didn't want you hearing this from someone else. The smile faded from her face. I handed her the papers. She stared at the first page, then at me, then back at the page. No. Her voice barely came out. Dan? The laughter disappeared. Paper plates lowered. Even the children stopped running. Linda looked up, tears already filling her eyes. You can't be serious, I answered gently. I've never been more serious in my life. For the first time since the birthday party, everybody was finally looking at me. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the slow hum of the ceiling fan over the patio and the sizzle of ribs still cooking on the grill. Linda stared at the papers in her hands as if they were written in another language. No, she whispered. No, this isn't happening. Michael stepped closer. What is it? Linda didn't answer. She couldn't. He gently took the first page from her trembling hands. His eyes moved across the heading, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. He looked at me. Dan. I nodded once. I'm done pretending. The yard felt different now. Nobody was smiling anymore. Even the grandchildren sensed something had changed. They drifted toward the swing set while the adults gathered in uneasy silence. Linda finally found her voice. You're divorcing me over one picture. I looked at her for a long moment. If you still think this is about one picture, I shook my head. Then you still don't understand. She wiped tears from her cheeks. Help me understand. For the first time in weeks, I decided to tell the truth without protecting anyone's feelings. I spent 12 years trying to become part of this family. I looked around the yard. I paid for vacations. I remodeled this house. I drove your mother to doctor's appointments. I watched Emma when you and Paige needed help. I showed up every single time somebody needed me. I paused. But when it mattered, I glanced toward the photograph still taped to the gift table. I wasn't family. Nobody interrupted. I've been making excuses for all of you. For years, I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself Tom was around because everyone had matured. I turned toward Tom. I never blamed you. Tom looked uncomfortable. I know. His voice was quiet. I honestly didn't think she'd ask you to step out. I believe you. That surprised everyone, including Tom. He slowly set his paper plate on the picnic table. I would have moved. Linda turned toward him. You never said that. You never gave me the chance. The backyard became even quieter. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. Then to my surprise, he spoke. Dan's right. Linda looked at her brother in disbelief. What? I should have said something years ago. You too. He nodded slowly. I hated that picture. Then why didn't you stop it? Michael lowered his eyes. Because I didn't want to embarrass you. A sad smile crossed my face. You were trying to protect the wrong person. No one argued. Linda's mother sat heavily in one of the patio chairs. She looked 10 years older than she had an hour earlier. I never meant to make you feel unwanted. I answered honestly. I know. But intentions don't erase what people live through. Paige stepped forward. Her eyes were red. I owe you an apology. I looked at her. You've been more of a father to Emma than anybody. She wiped away another tear. I guess I thought she couldn't finish. You thought I'd always stay. She nodded. I did. For the first time all afternoon, I felt something besides hurt. I felt tired. Very tired. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It isn't just the birthday. Linda looked up. What is that? A copy of the estate plan. Her face lost what little color she had left. I didn't hold it up for everyone to see. I wasn't there to humiliate her. I simply looked at Linda. I found the envelope. She closed her eyes. Oh, I wasn't angry that Paige inherited the house. I would have expected that. I was hurt that you changed everything without telling me. Tears rolled down her face. I didn't know how. So you said nothing. She nodded. I kept thinking I'd explain it later. I smiled sadly. Later has a way of disappearing. No one spoke. The only sound came from the wind moving through the maple tree. Finally, Linda whispered the words I never expected to hear. I spent so much time trying to keep everyone together. She looked around at her family. That I never noticed I was pushing away the man who never left. I believe she meant it. I truly did. But some realizations arrived too late. Not because forgiveness is impossible, because trust has already packed its bags. I looked at everyone one last time. I don't hate any of you. I just can't keep living somewhere I'm always asked to make room. Then I quietly turned, walked to my truck, and drove away. This time, no one asked me to come back. The divorce was finalized a little over 4 months later. There wasn't any shouting in the courtroom. No dramatic speeches. Just two people sitting at separate tables in the Pulaski County Courthouse while a judge asked a handful of questions we'd already answered on paper. Mr. Harper, the judge said, adjusting his glasses, are you entering this agreement voluntarily? Yes, Your Honor. And Mrs. Harper? Linda swallowed. Yes. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. 12 years of marriage officially ended before the parking meter outside expired. As we walked into the hallway, Linda caught up with me. Dan? I stopped. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Just tired. I don't expect you to change your mind. I nodded. But I wanted to tell you something. I waited. I finally took that picture down. I knew exactly which one she meant. The birthday photo. She nodded. I couldn't stand looking at it anymore. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. You know what I see every time I close my eyes? I shook my head. The empty place where you were supposed to be. There wasn't anything I could say to that. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. I found this while cleaning out the office. Inside was a photograph, not the birthday picture. It was one Frank had taken years earlier during our neighborhood 4th of July cookout. Linda was laughing. I was flipping burgers. Neither of us was looking at the camera. On the back, Frank had written in black ink, "The happiest pictures are the ones nobody planned." Linda smiled through her tears. I forgot this one even existed. So did I. She held it for another second before slipping it back into the envelope. I'm sorry, Dan. I know. I wish I'd understood sooner. I wish you had too. She gave me one last hug. This time I hugged her back. Not because we were getting back together, because 12 years deserved a proper goodbye. Then we walked toward different parking lots. Neither of us looked back. By early October, I was living in my cabin outside Clinton, Tennessee. Most mornings started the same way. Coffee on the porch, the sound of the creek behind the house, a pair of cardinals that argued over the bird feeder every sunrise. I learned something surprising. Peace has a sound. It isn't silence. It's waking up without waiting for the next disappointment. Frank came down one weekend carrying enough fishing gear for 3 people. You buying all this fresh air or what? He joked. We spent the afternoon on Norris Lake. Neither of us caught much. Didn't matter. On the drive home, he glanced at me. You seem different. I am. Happier. I thought about it. Not happier every day, but lighter. He nodded. I can see that. A few weeks later, I ran into an old high school classmate, Diane Mercer, at a church fundraiser. She'd been widowed for almost 6 years. We shared coffee after the event, then lunch the following week. Neither of us was trying to replace anyone. We simply enjoyed having someone to talk to who understood that life after 60 looked different than it did at 30. There was no rush, no pressure, just conversation. One evening my phone buzzed. It was Michael. You should know something. What is it? Linda finally deleted the birthday picture. I looked out toward the creek. I figured she would. He sighed. She said keeping it felt like keeping the worst decision she ever made. After we hung up, I sat quietly on the porch. For months, I'd thought that photograph had ended my marriage. Now I understood something else. The picture hadn't destroyed anything. It had simply revealed what had been hidden for far too long. And sometimes, the truth hurts most when it's impossible to crop out. The first Christmas after the divorce felt strange. Not lonely, just different. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing from one family gathering to another, loading folding chairs into the truck, or wondering whether I'd be included in the next group photo. Instead, I woke up in my little cabin outside Clinton, Tennessee. The temperature had dropped into the 20s overnight. A light frost covered the porch railing and smoke drifted lazily from a neighbor's chimney farther down the road. I made a pot of coffee, pulled on my old flannel jacket, and carried my mug onto the porch. The creek behind the cabin never stopped moving. Neither I realized did life. Around 9 o'clock, Frank called. "Merry Christmas, old man," I laughed. "Merry Christmas to you. You still planning on burning that terrible bacon?" "I've upgraded." "Oh, I'm making pancakes," he chuckled. "Well, that's personal growth." We talked for a few minutes before hanging up. Simple conversations had started meaning more to me than complicated relationships ever did. Later that afternoon, Diane stopped by with a homemade pecan pie. I figured nobody should spend Christmas eating frozen dinners. I was actually pretty proud of my pancakes. "I'm sure you were," she said with a smile. "That doesn't mean they were any good." We laughed. It felt easy, comfortable. There wasn't any pressure to define what we were. At our age, companionship mattered more than labels. After she left, I opened a box I'd been meaning to unpack. Inside were photographs from different chapters of my life. My UPS retirement party, fishing trips with my late brother, Christmas mornings with my parents, my wedding to Linda. I looked at that one for a long time. Then I placed it back in the box. Not because I hated those years. I didn't. There had been real love, real laughter, real memories. The marriage wasn't a lie. It simply stopped being the place where I belonged. At the bottom of the box, I found another picture. Frank had taken it years ago. I was standing knee-deep in a creek, holding up a smallmouth bass with the biggest grin on my face. Nobody else was in the frame. For years, I would have thought it looked lonely. Now it looked peaceful. I slipped it into a wooden frame and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. That became my favorite photograph. Not because I was alone, because I was finally comfortable with who I was. A few days after New Year's, Michael called one last time. "Linda asked me to tell you something." I waited. "She said you were the best husband she ever had." I smiled sadly. "I hope someday she believes she deserved one." He was quiet for a moment. "So, are you happy?" I looked through the window at the snow beginning to fall across the trees. "I don't think happiness is something you arrive at." "What do you mean?" "I think it's something you build. One honest decision at a time." After we hung up, I sat by the fire until the room grew dark. If there's one thing these past few years have taught me, it's this. Being loved means very little if you aren't respected. And respect starts with the way you treat yourself. For too long, I confused keeping the peace with keeping my dignity. They're not the same thing. Walking away wasn't the easiest decision I ever made. It was the hardest. But sometimes the hardest choice is the one that finally gives you your life back. If you've ever felt invisible, I hope you remember this. Your value isn't measured by whether someone saves you a place in their picture. It's measured by the character you carry, even when no one else notices. And if this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear that, I hope you'll share it with them. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope we'll meet again in another story. The end.